It's time for bed, but you're not tired. You want to stay up and watch Adult Swim while mommy and daddy are sleeping, so they won't be able to tell you not to watch it. But you'll regret this, because now you'll be wide awake when the thing in the closet begins to slowly crawl out. And it doesn't care if you see it or not, it's just hungry. Enjoy these assorted, allegedly true scary stories that are perfect for bedtime. If you have a scary experience, share it with us at darkstories.org. Like and share this video to support the show. Now, let's begin. Pizza for the Ranch, from Octopotacto. On my first summer back home from freshman year of college, I picked up a part-time job delivering pizza in a town around 30 minutes away from where I lived. The area in rural Georgia is known for having places that are in the middle of nowhere, and the pizza place's whole shtick is that it would be delivered to even the most remote area imaginable, within the town limits. I could fill books with the weird experiences that summer. From a call that came from a long-abandoned warehouse, to the dog that got excited about the pizza in my hand and accidentally shredded my pants with her claws. But one experience will always stand out in my mind as the creepiest. It was getting fairly late at night, around 10:30 p.m., so I was confident at the time that I would be sent on no further calls before closing at 11. However, someone barely managed to miss the cutoff time, and our clerk accepted their order since they were so close. I was given the address and a single box of hot dough, then sent on my merry little way. The first red flag was the driveway, or rather the lack thereof. There was a mailbox, but no actual driveway, not even gravel. It was just grass and a barely distinguishable trodden pathway that resembled more of a service trail than it did something frequently used. I bumped along, wondering if I was even en route to the place, when I saw a slightly above average sized house come over the horizon, horribly dilapidated and completely surrounded by overgrown woods. I guessed where the rest of the driveway led and ended up parking in a grassy patch that could have been the walkway just as easily as it could have been the front yard, headlights aimed toward the porch, as per company policy. I walked up to the door, but I believe that calling it a door was generous. It was a door frame, all right. But the door itself was just a large slab of wood propped haphazardly against the side of the house, barely covering the entrance. This was red flag number 2. The third and fourth red flag were also on the door. This included the A4 sheet of printer paper with the words "Around Back" scribbled in all caps, which was hanging just below the place where somebody had self-engraved the door with the title Manson Family Ranch. Typically, I would never go around the back of a house, especially a shady, unlit house, and especially at night. However, it was my last drop of the day, and I was ready to get it over with and to be on my way home. Against my better judgment, I traipsed around to the back of the house. The door back there was an actual door, but it was covered in both cobwebs and fresh spider webs. Clearly, this was a door that had not been used in some time. I found the cleanest area available and knocked. I counted to 45 and knocked again. There were no lights on in the house, and I could hear no movement from inside. I knocked and counted again, then repeated the sequence 3 more times before I was finally creeped out enough to decide to return to my car. As I turned, I finally heard a voice coming from inside the house, clearly agitated, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. I tried to knock 1 more time, and as I was counting, I heard something in the woods behind me. It started out as just movement deep in the trees, but soon enough I could make out distinct running footsteps coming directly at me through the brush. As I'm standing there, coming to terms with my impending demise, I follow the direction of the noise to the edge of the woods, which is around 15 feet away from me. In the moonlight, I could clearly see the woman who stepped out. She was relatively old, maybe in her 60s, I'd guess. She had long blonde gray hair, which was tangled and matted and hung down past her hips. She was in what looked to be an originally white nightgown, but at the time, it was dingy and closer to a beige-brown color. She was absolutely barefoot, and her feet were covered in dirt and what had to be blood, presumably due to the fact that she had just sprinted through the prickly woods, where there was no trail to be seen. I never learned her name, but I still affectionately refer to her as Red Flag Number 5. She stopped short when she saw me and started to shake her head, no, eyes wide. I stood there like a terrified deer in the most screwed up headlights ever, as she took a few more steps towards me, reaching out to me, finger pointed. Her voice came out way stronger than mine would have at the time when she spoke. You know how southern people can either sound like loving grandmas or backwoods murderers? Well, she sounded like the latter when she drawled, "Oh, no, honey. Now you get on. You get on out of here." I wish I could say I listened. I ran, I left, but I was in so much shock at how events were playing out that my own self-preservation was put on a back burner, while I tried to figure out just what in the Kentucky Fried F was happening. She seemed to realize that I was not moving, even if I could not make my mouth move to ask her what was happening, or even what to do with the stupid pizza in my hands. She looked at me like she could smack the heck out of me right then and there, and proceeded to deliver red flags 6 through 12. "Darling, did you hear me? You deaf or dumb? Young girls like you come out here and then they don't get to leave." So I finally quit acting like the white person in a horror film, realizing that this was not a funny little ghost story. This was 5'3", 116-pound me potentially being targeted to be robbed, or worse. So I dropped the dumb little pizza, which had serious serial killer toppings, by the way, and started running back to my car, which I had stupidly left on and unlocked. This was usual for my deliveries, though. As I neared the car, I heard a slam from behind me. I looked over my shoulder to see that the wooden door had been pushed over and had fallen onto the porch beneath it. As I was closing the car door, an older man was limping down the front steps, waving his arms like an airplane runway attendant at me, calling me a little B word, telling me to get out of the effing car now. At a loss for what to do, I called out something muttery and shaky along the lines of, "Pizza's out back." I floored my dad's crappy little 90s Lexus and somehow managed to avoid trees on the odd trail back to the main road, which was still 12 miles and several turns from any road that actually had a name, let alone painted lines. I reported this to my manager, and he said he contacted the police, but nothing ever came of it. Not that I'm aware of. Either way, that was my first and hopefully last personal encounter with the self-proclaimed Manson family ranch. The haunted forest I grew up in, from Katty Vengeance. I grew up on an isolated farm in Jackson County, West Virginia. My parents moved us there when I was only 8 years old, and my first impression was one of total awe. I had no idea woods could be so expansive, and coming from the middle of a small town into the literal sticks, was totally awesome when I was a kid. We had a creek that I could play in, and when I got a little older, I was allowed to head out into the woods to explore to my heart's content. However, during the move-in process, I did take note of a somewhat odd feeling. The old folks who sold us the house were very eager to get it off their hands. So much so, they ended up knocking off about $100K from the original asking price, practically throwing it into my parents' laps. They left the house with a ton of original furniture, and the backyard was something of a fixer-upper, with several sheds and buildings dedicated to holding their old scrap and junk that they'd collected over the years. My dad cleared all that out, and really they left some pretty cool things. 2 World War II Jeeps that my dad restored later on, a bunch of crystal dinnerware from the 20s, really old farm tools, you get the idea. Some of those things were somewhat valuable, and we were a little surprised that they never came back or asked for any of it. We figured they were just old, and maybe didn't want a whole bunch of knickknacks to deal with. The house itself was pretty nice. It was built in a colonial style, with a big front porch and those white pillars that you associate with the style. The interior of the home had been put together using wood from the old farmhouse that had once stood on the property, so there were components of the house that dated back almost 200 years. We, of course, got our choice of bedrooms. My parents got the master bedroom, which was an extremely large space that was mostly new, while my sister and I got rooms next to one another, both of which had been a part of the old house. My room had once been a kitchen and had these awesome hardwood floors. It even had its own door leading into the backyard. Everything was great for a while. Then some weird things started to happen. The first thing that I remembered, which I did not immediately chalk up to being odd, was the woman. I had been walking toward the porch from the driveway, probably fetching something for Dad, who worked a lot in the garage. That's when I saw a lady. She was wearing a long olive green dress, and her blonde hair was pulled back into a braid that led down her back. I was confused. I'd never seen this lady before, so I watched her walk around the side of the porch, then disappear around the corner of the house. Being the nosy kid I was, I followed her. When I got to the backyard, there was no one there. Granted, there were tons of buildings she might have been able to go into, but I did have a look around. Again, I was a nosy kid, but I never did find her. I assumed she was a family member of the old folks who sold the place, coming to retrieve some of their items. So I went and asked my mom about her, and she was met with confusion. My mom didn't know of anyone coming to pick anything up, and besides, there had been no unfamiliar cars in the driveway, so I kind of just put the incident out of my head. The next strange event happened with one of our family dogs. His name was Cody. He was a gray mutt with these big black splotches all over his coat. He was really pretty looking, and we'd raised him from a puppy. He'd always been super friendly, and now he finally had a nice big yard to play in. We took him everywhere, kind of as a form of protection since he was a pretty large dog. One day, I was just walking around the yard, playing in the creek and generally minding my own business, when Cody suddenly snapped. Cody attacked me, bit my arm pretty bad. I was in hysterics, terrified. I hadn't even been playing with him. I hadn't been near him. He just came out of nowhere and chomped me. My dad tied him up and said maybe I just didn't see him. Maybe I scared him, or he mistook me for a stranger or something. We tried to rationalize the odd behavior. After all, we did raise him from a puppy. We knew this dog. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He wasn't sick either. He ate and drank just fine. And he had been vaccinated fully. never showing any symptoms of rabies or distemper. I've never done anything to hurt an animal, especially not a dog that I loved unconditionally. Over the next few months, Cody's behavior changed. He grew distant, and anytime we let him off his chain, we normally only tied our dogs up during deer season to keep them from being shot, he would keep away from us, as if he distrusted us, and slept far down the driveway, away from the house. We had also come to adopt this pretty white cat we'd found. It had been injured near the creek one day. We nursed him back to health and named him Tigger for the limp he had, because it made him look like he was hopping around. One day I was feeding him on the back porch, when again, out of nowhere, Cody busted through the flimsy screen door, snarling and snapping. I panicked, thinking he was after me again, until I saw him grab hold of Tigger's bad leg. I screamed and my dad came running. We got the cat away from the enraged dog, and thankfully the poor cat had gotten out of it with little more than a scrape from Cody's teeth. My dad made the decision to keep Cody on his chain then, because he was beginning to worry about the strange behavior. I mean, this sweet, loving dog had just busted through a screen like the Kool-Aid Man to attack the cat. Eventually, Cody broke his chain during Easter. He tried to attack my dad that time. At that point, my dad felt he had no choice. He ended up having to put Cody down. It was a really sad day for us all, and none of us could understand why he'd suddenly become such a mean dog. Maybe Cody's behavior could be explained. Maybe he did have a disease we didn't know about, or maybe he simply turned wild for some reason. However, over the years we began to notice a pattern. It seemed like any male animal we adopted suffered the same fate. Male dogs would be adopted, only to be found dead with no discernible cause. Male cattle would simply lay down and die. Our male cats would vanish completely, and even our roosters would just lay down and die too. The worst was the morning we got up to find nearly our whole herd of goats lying dead in their grazing field. That was 7 or 8 goats, just dead. No marks, no immediate cause visible. These animals just died. Only the males. And it gets weirder. Throughout our 300-acre farm, I would find stacks of bones. Dozens of these weird cairns just scattered all around our property. One pile would come up to my thigh, sometimes to my waist, and the bones would be from all kinds of animals. Mostly deer, but there were squirrel bones, cat skulls, what we think might have been dog bones, etc. My dad just told me to leave them alone. And of course, I did. Now, these last 2 experiences are the most frightening ones of the lot. When I was 15 or 16, I rode down to the closest neighbor's house with my parents. They were older people, and they liked having visitors. My parents could get pretty carried away when hanging out with them. It was getting late, and I was tired, so I opted to walk home. It was maybe 1.5 miles to 2 miles away, which was kind of far, but I'd walked it before, so it was no big deal. I was about 2/3 of the way home in our driveway when I heard a sound in the woods to my right. It was fairly flat, but at this point it was getting pretty dark, so I didn't see anything right away. I assumed it was just the local wildlife, like a deer or raccoon or something, until it growled at me. A deep canine sound that was so close I could feel it vibrate in my chest. I heard sticks breaking, clearly coming towards me. My fight or flight instinct kicked in. I ran as hard and as fast as I could from whatever was growling at me, and the most frightening thing about that was the fact that I heard the gravel behind me scrape, as if whatever was chasing me had leapt across the creek that separated the woods from our driveway. That was a decent-sized gap, about 6 feet or so across, Then they landed hard in the gravel. That meant it cleared the creek in one bound and launched hard enough to displace the rocks in the driveway. I screamed as I ran, and somehow I made it all the way to my door without being caught. I slammed it shut and panicked, making sure all the windows were closed tight and all the doors were locked until I saw my parents come home. They came barreling in. My dad grabbed his hunting rifle and turned right back around, zipping down the driveway on our ATV. I asked my mom what he was doing, and she said, "There was a man all dressed in red, standing in the creek back at the gate." I got chills. My dad came back and said whoever had been there was gone now, but he'd be checking the trail cams in the morning first thing. It always seemed so strange to me that my mom would phrase it like that, all dressed in red. I don't know if some drughead was growling at me from the woods and chased me, and even if that was the case, I know there was no way he could have leapt across the creek the way he did without splashing in it. The sound that I heard was also not comparable to the sound a person would make. I know people can growl, but to sound like a dog, and for it to be so powerful that it literally shook me. I have no idea what happened that night, and honestly, I don't know if I'm more frightened of the thought of having been chased by a strange man or a strange creature. This last story is what makes me convinced our forest was haunted by some kind of evil. It's a brief encounter that I had while standing in our living room. I was facing the window that looked out over the porch and up the little hill to our barn, when suddenly I saw something. It was a huge shape, completely black, running on 2 legs. It ran with its arms outstretched. I could clearly see its hands, outlined against the night sky. Each finger spread out wide as it came flying down from the barn. This thing was shaped like a human male, with huge arms and a huge body, but I swear to you that this thing had no head. It was likely to be about 8 feet tall, built like the Hulk, and ran with its arms stretched high. It had no head, just a thick neck. I stuttered and tried to get the words out when I saw this thing, pointing and jumping up and down, trying to get my mom, who was sitting on the couch at the time, to turn and see it. The thing just vanished as it ran by our porch, and of course, my mom thought I was having some kind of fit. She didn't realize that I was legitimately having a panic attack. I never saw it, or the woman from the first part of the story, again. We moved from that farm when I turned 18. There were lots of other small things that happened around the farm that didn't make it into this story, but maybe I'll share those a different time. So, what do you think about these things? What could they have been? Are they ghosts? Demons? I honestly have no idea. I've never heard of a headless monster entity before, let alone a spirit that seems to target only male animals. These things were all quite strange on their own, and I have no idea how. I've no idea if they connect in any way, or if they're all just a series of anomalies. If you've got a theory, I'd love to know. The Shape-Shifting Monster from Buried Alive, 1996. My uncle had a ranch that bordered Black Star Canyon. My dad and I would visit the ranch every weekend. Down there, my uncle had 4 dogs, 3 German Shepherds, and a Golden Retriever. I would always hang out and talk with them, as I was hesitant to hang around people. On one occasion, the rodeo was in town, so my uncle and my dad left me and my cousins at the ranch. Deciding to have our own fun, me and my youngest cousin, Miriam, decided to cross the property line into the canyon nearby. The canyon borders the highway and a small neighborhood. I grabbed my Winchester pellet gun in case of snakes and coyotes. We walked for about 10 minutes when we saw what appeared to be a homeless man on a hill not too far away. I didn't worry too much, because there was a homeless camp in the other direction. After a few more minutes, I saw another homeless man, but he was taller and much more raggedy. He was pretty distant, but despite that, he looked at us, causing the mood to immediately change. The dogs that were with us, the nearby neighbors' dogs who sometimes followed us when we went out, grew uneasy. They turned to look at the man, going into defensive mode and circling my cousin. I turned back toward the man. He was much closer than he should have been now, but he didn't appear to be moving at all. I blinked, and then he was gone. But in his place, there was now a large coyote. Now that there was a coyote coming towards us, I aimed my Winchester pellet gun, and I fired. I looked down to put another pellet in the chamber, and when I looked back up, there was now a rabbit. I looked on in confusion. Where was the man? Where was the especially large coyote? And why did the dogs continue to growl at the rabbit? There was nothing threatening about it. Even so, it was coming towards us, like the man and coyote had. There was something horribly wrong about this. Tears streaming down my face, I picked up my cousin and ran back to the ranch, the dogs following behind us. I made it to the gate, throwing it open and chaining it shut. I jumped behind a barrel and aimed at the gate, waiting for something to appear. I could hear my heart pounding through my ears. All the animals around us were quiet. Something that I couldn't see from that perspective began to violently shake at the gate. It scared the devil out of me, and it spooked one of the horses nearby, who kicked open his pen and ran at us. I got my cousin and I on top of an old truck. After a few minutes, the horse calmed down. The gate stopped shaking, and I got my cousin and ran toward the fence to the house. I sat on the porch with her, and our dogs just stared at the back gate. She asked me what was going on. I told her it was just coyotes, since I didn't want to scare her. She believed me, being only 5 at the time. It's been almost 3 years, and every time I go to the ranch, the dogs seem more unsettled, like there's something out there that they're wary of. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails. More scary stories are on the way as usual. If you have your own scary experience and you'd like to have your story in a video, share it with us at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links in the description and like and share this episode. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who have donated or continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.